Hey everybody, hope you guys are doing good this morning. Time for another bait modification series. And man, the one I'm going to give you today is something that has taken me a long time to learn through lots of trial and error, through lots of fishing, through fishing with it for over 40 years. And you know, I had a chance early on when I was in my early 20s to learn from one of the best jig masters in the entire world, the flipping jig masters. And you've heard me talk about him before. His name's Terry Thomas. He lives here around Springfield, Missouri. And Terry was one of my big mentors early on, and he was one of the top flippers in the world, still is, and won tons of tournaments with it. And I learned about the technique from Terry, and he taught me a lot about jigs, understanding how to use them, when to use them, retrieves, colors, all that type of stuff. And then I've taken it over the course of my own career and came up with some of these modifications I'm going to show you today. So when you're talking about all these secrets that I'm giving, the modifications and secrets, it's just like, yeah, they are secret modifications, but you still have to know the right time to use them, under what conditions. And also my plan is I'm gonna try to share all that stuff with you moving forward down the road here, knowing the best time to use them and when to put them on and when to take them off. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through I'm going to build a jig, a flipping jig setup, just the way I would for a tournament, show you how I do it from start to finish. I'm not going to get into a lot of like how to fish it or when to fish it, that type of stuff. We'll do that in a later video. But today I just want to show you how I modify my flipping jig before I get started out most of the time. Okay, let's get started with this thing now. Now the jigs that I use a lot of different type of jigs, a lot of different models. It just depends. For my flipping jigs, I use a lot of lunker lures. But for today's topic, I just got this is just a Strike King hack attack jig. And by the way, before we get started also, if you guys, any of the stuff that I'm talking about, if you guys would like to try it and order it, I've included the Fish the Moment Tackle Warehouse link in the description here. And if you guys could use that link, it would really help Johnny and I out. Get a small percentage of those profits, helps sort of keep the lights on around the house. I appreciate that. So we're going to start out today with the just the hack attack head. You can use whatever head you want. So the first thing on the flipping jig that I want to sort of tell you about is the skirt situation. Now I tie my own skirts like we've talked about, and with the flipping jig, or jigs in general, it's all about how many skirt layers you want to use. But on a flipping jig setup, I use 3 layers like this. And what that's going to do, it's going to give the jig a really bulky profile. And the good thing about that is once you put 3 skirt layers on there, that gives you the opportunity to trim it down, however you like it. But just having those 3 skirt layers is a big deal to me for a flipping jig. So I take my trusty skirt tool here, got my rubber collar here, and I'm going to do a video at some point, show you guys how to hand tie these. But most of the time, if I'm using silicone on a flipping jig with 3 skirts, I'm using a rubber collar on it, because you don't really need that flare like you do on a smaller number of skirt layers. So anyway, I could put my skirts in here. Now here again, when you put this in there, if you tie your own skirts, it's really important to remember, don't come through very far. You only want to come through about that far on it, because I'll show you what I'm talking about while you do that. It basically creates a better look for the jig if you don't take that collar up halfway on it. So there's our skirt layer like that before we trim it. Then I'm going to take my scissors, trim the ends like that. Trim all that off of there. So I've got my skirt set up like this with the collar about that far down. So then I take it and I take the long side up with it like that. That's how I want to hook it on. Make sure you got the skirt all centered through there. Okay, so I've got my jig on there like that. So you can see right now it's a pretty long skirt the way you got there, and that's how I want it. And we're going to modify that. We're going to trim it up a little bit here in a second, you know, get everything piece by piece, but that's the initial way that it looks like that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take a zoom trick worm. This is like just a regular trick worm. This is a black sapphire with the blue on it. And what I'm going to do is, you see the egg sac right there? I'm going to cut the fattest part of it right at the egg sac, and then right below the egg sac. So I've got a piece of worm that's probably 3/4 of an inch long. What we're going to do with the worm is we're going to thread it up over the shank of the hook. And what this does, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit, I'll explain to you here in a second what this does, but I'm going to just show you how to put it up here first like this. It's going to go like that, and then I'm going to maybe trim just a little bit of the sides off like that. So we've got the trick worm on there just like that. I'll explain here in a second why I do that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to modify the weed guard. Most weed guards come like this out of the factory, you know, where they're just flat across like that. I want to trim it parallel to the hook. I'm not going to take very much off. Just sort of parallel like that, where it comes up a little bit more like that. And I want the tip of the weed guard just where it barely touches the guard, the hook point itself. See, like that? And then I'll flare it out a little bit. And I use it thick like this. If I'm fishing, you know, heady cover, laydowns, bushes, that type of stuff, I'll use it, I'll fish it, I'll have it pretty thick. But sometimes if it's not, I may trim off, you know, 5 or 6 strands of it there. Just depends on the jig you use. Some jigs that you use have different type of weed guards. They have more fiber in it, they're stiffer. So what you want is you want the weed guard, it's a fine line between having the weed guard too stiff and not stiff enough. So you just want the weed guard to keep you from getting hung up, but you don't want it to affect you hooking the fish. So each weed guard has to be modified accordingly. Excuse me. Next we got the trailer. And for my flipping jigs, you know, I use basically 2 different type of trailers. I use the Zoom Big Salty Chunk, which is my favorite, and then I use the Super Chunk sometimes. But if I can get away with it, I like the Zoom Big Salty Chunk. It's like the old pork frog. I catch a lot of fish on it. And I'm going to show you guys a common mistake that I don't want you to do. Is I see so many guys hooking a Super Chunk on like this. They come through like that, and they've got the thing upside down like that. This is not the way this chunk is meant to be put on. I even see some pros doing it. Do not put the chunk on like this. This is not, it's this side right here is meant to be facing down, not like that. So right off the bat, just don't do that. But for the first thing I want to show you how to do is I'm wanting to take some of this meat off the side. So I come in, see the edges here, the sort of like the sharp edges on the Big Salty Chunk, is I take those corners off. You know, see that sharp edge right there, like that? I'm going to show you, I'm going to take that corner off where it's flatter all the way around like that. And the most important cut that you make is right on the part that you hook in. You want to take that meat off of there and make it real thin like that. Thin that down there, because what that does, that gives you more hook penetration on it. Had another one around here. Hold on one second, I'll show you before and after here what that looks like. And the whole reason that you're doing this with the with cutting the plastic off of it is you're just taking some of the meat off the side of it. You know, see a little bit. Look at the top of that there. See how the top of that is thinner than the stock one right here? How much thin this is? That gives you twice as much bite gap on your hook. So next thing I'm doing, letting it off, put my frog on the correct side down. And this is when the plastic keeper comes in. See the rubber keeper I got here? The reason that you have this on here is it keeps the Big Salty Chunk from sliding up the shank Sometimes if you don't have this on here, it will slide up the shank, and this fat part of the frog will get in front of the hook like that, inside of the fish's mouth, and you set the hook on it, and it'll like come through part of that, and you'll miss the fish. But by keeping this piece of plastic right here, it really keeps that from sliding very far up there like that. So that's what we got here. Now, one last modification I have on it is I'm going to trim the skirt back. Now, what I want to do with the skirt is I don't want to trim it uniform. I want to keep the skirt gnarly looking. So I come through about halfway up and I just cut a few strands out to make it a little bit gnarly looking. And I just don't want any strands interfering with the legs here. And it's okay if it covers part of the pork frog, but basically what I'm doing, I'm just cutting a few pieces here and there to make the bait flare out a little bit more. And then finally, you sort of have to go through and break up some of the fibers. And it takes this is probably some of the longest process because I've got some of them you can see they're a little bit wider than others. So I'm trying to, fix those up a little bit more there. So anyway, that's my finished product there. This is my modified flipping jig. One more big tip I'm going to give you guys about jigs. I won't get into the colors too much, but when you're talking about jig colors, you need to focus on the dark colors. Black, I use lots of blacks, lots of blues. Big fish like a dark color on a jig. The big fish will get a dark color before any other jig. A lot of people use browns and green pumpkins and they work good, but if you can get the fish to hit a dark jig, that's how you're going to get your big ones on it. So anyway, that's my modification there. This is exactly how I use the jigs for all my tournament flipping situations. All of the Bassmaster top 150s and top 100s I've ever won in my career have come on just this setup right here, big dark jigs. And a lot of the other tournaments I've won too have come on this too. So, what are you doing? Are you up this morning? Oh, Elijah's just peeking through the door there. So anyway, guys, that's the jig modification. Hope you guys enjoy this tip. Give it a try. I know it'll work for you. Big fish bait. One of my top 3 favorite baits to fish of all time. So we'll see you guys later. Thanks.